Welcome everyone. Communicable disease and its management will be the focus of our presentation in this particular video. So yes, we'll talk everything about the diseases and its management. Remember, we are talking only about communicable disease. Communicable disease is a disease which communicates or which gets transferred from one person to another person. So we will define the communicable disease, the control, the elimination, and probable eradication process for it. We'll try to draw an inference with the cycles of infections, give example of different types of infectious agents per se, if there are any. List three types of reservoir of infections. What are those three types? If we can eliminate, if possible, those reservoir altogether. Classify carriers, and explain to public health importance in disease transmission. Illustrate with example the different modes of transmissions of communicable diseases, thereby define incubation period and the state of importance of the knowledge of intrinsic incubation period. Classify and differentiate between the types of immunity. Outline the measures for prevention and control of communicable diseases thereby. So what exactly is communicable disease? It's an illness caused by infectious agents or is toxic product that gets transmitted from an infected person, animal, or inanimate source to a susceptible host altogether. Believe me or not, this is all about transferability of disease from one being to another being. So it's an infectious agent altogether. It can be basically get transferred from an animal to a man, from a man to a man, from a substance to a man, as in when probably if I go to a restaurant, have my food, and I am an infectious person, the cutlery that I've utilized, if somebody else is going to touch onto those cutleries, onto those tables, get in touch with it, they are not getting in touch with me directly, but probably the next host person can be the person who were in touch with those tables, the cutleries, and thereof. So it gets transferred from substance to a person also. Anything which is transmitted from one person to another host is all what we are looking as a communicable diseases. So let us understand the chain of infection thereby. Epidemiologic tribes. We're talking about the vectors. Remember, vector is the disease criteria, the virus, the agent, the bacteria, the anomaly in between. So we have the vector that gets transferred from an agent through an environment or to the host. So you have a host where the vector is lying, and then there is an environment through which, let's say, in my cases of the example of the restaurant visit, I am the host, and probably the table, the cutlery which I utilize in that restaurant, if not washed quickly or probably in a right fashion, it becomes a part of an environment. And at the end of it, there is an agent which goes probably has that infection altogether. So, as an agent, from an agent to a host, from a host to agent, via the environment, directly or indirectly, is what the epidemiologic triad is all about it. Cycle of infection. So, if you look into it, it's from the agent which gets transmitted to the portal of entry to the susceptible host, and host becomes a reservoir and a portal of exit thereby. So the type of agent is all about virus, all about bacteria, all about parasite that comes around it. We are talking about the reservoirs every now and then. It is the reservoir that is the basically heaven for the bacteria, vector, virus, parasite, heaven, because at those reservoir they thrive, they actually multiply, where the infective agents survives, grows, and multiplies in such a fashion that it can be transmitted from a susceptible host to a susceptible host. The reservoir of infection can be a human, a case, or a carrier. Carrier is a person with an unapparent infection that transmitted the disease to another gentleman or lady. So probably the person, the carrier, might himself not or herself might not get affected, but definitely these becomes a part and parcel of the flow. Animal can also be a similarly a case or a carrier. Environmental reservoir is a water or soil. a legendary disease, water, you find it, we're talking about dengue, we're talking about malaria. Every bacteria actually thrives on water. Soil is botulism or tetanus, combination of these factors that we look into it. And obviously, yes, we are talking about the plants thereby as an environmental reservoir. The chain of infection is very easy, as I've been trying to tell it to you. It gets transformed from susceptible host to an agent, or agent to a susceptible host via transmissions, via portal of entry, via portal of exit, via a reservoirs, as the case might be. So yes, we are talking everything that gets transmitted. The agent is the mechanism of the disease production or the pathogenesis, as the case might be. They're talking about invasiveness, ability of the organism to invade the tissues and multiply. Toxigenicity is the ability of the organism to produce the toxin. Exotoxin released by the living organism, heat, liable, highly immunogenic, and converted into antigen or toxoid by formalin, heat and acid. We're talking about endotoxin released after disintegration of the organism, heat, stable, poorly immunogenic, and not converted to toxoid, as the case might be. So let us talk about the agent pathogenicity. It's the power of an infectious agent to produce a disease, and that becomes very, very uh, mm, potent altogether. So the power is very important. Then comes the virulence. Virulence is how effective it is, ability to produce severe pathological reaction, measured by the ratio of clinical or subclinical diseases and case fatality rate. Dose of infection is inoculum, high probability of severe diseases with higher doses of infection. Viability of organism is the resistance, ability of the organism to live outside the body. Spore formations maintain viability for a long period in unfavorable environmental condition. Antigenic power of organism, ability to stimulate the immune system to produce antibodies or antitoxin with subsequent immunity, measured by the second attack frequency. Ease of communicability is measured by the secondary attack rate, which is the number of secondary cases occurring within the range of incubation period following exposures to a primary case, expressed as a percentage of susceptible. So I am very sure about, we have spoken about the reservoir, we have spoken about the agent. Let us look at transmission this time. Now, how does it goes around it? Yes, transmission is the mode of transmission. It can be direct, it can be indirect. In terms of direct, it can be from skin to skin. For example, STDs. STDs is sexually transmitted diseases wherein you are getting in touch with one another. Droplet spread, spray with a droplet over a few feet of pertussis. Now, droplet spread is when somebody is speaking, probably there might be certain liquids which might be exited from the mouth, and it might be there in the ear, suspended in the ear, and people might get into it. When a person sneezes, for example, again the droplets are there in the ears, and probably it becomes a good carrier for a virus to be transmitted from one person to another person. In terms of indirect transmission, we are talking about airborne, a droplet, nuclear, or dust suspended in ear. Did I say the example of me visiting restaurant, me being the infected person, and probably utilizing a particular set of cutleries, a table, and probably even if I leave the restaurant in privacy, in all by myself, the next person might becomes a susceptible host because my viruses, parasite, bacteria might be prevalent on those cutleries, on that tablecloth, on that table of the restaurant which I've utilized. So it might be suspended. It's an indirect transmission. Vehicle, food, water, biological products, formites, whatever you name it. We can talk about insects as a vector, wherein one mosquito is biting an infected person and then perhaps biting another healthy person, becomes a susceptible host altogether, may support growth or change in the agents. So incubation period is the period between the entry of organism and the appearances of first system of the disease. Knowledge of incubation period is important for surveillances and quarantine in some diseases. Application of preventive measures to abort or modify the attack. Identification of the sources of infection then and there, as on when on basis. So we have discussed the reservoir, we have discussed the agent, we have discussed the transmission. Now is the case when we'll talk about portal of entry altogether. How does it enter the susceptible host? So, and what are the portal of exit thereby? So, portal of entry is the path by which an infection agent enters the host, or probably path where the infection agent exits the host. This can be skin, this can be mucous membrane, respiratory tract, uh, GIT, the gastrointestinal E. coli, the gut, the blood. So anywhere and everywhere, anything that get excreted by our body, our physical body in terms of skin, there's a direct combat. We are talking about it. Mucous membrane. It's there in our mouth always. Mucous membrane would be any liquid that has been exchanged between individuals. Respiratory tracts is rhinovirus, EPF, gastrointestinal is E. coli, and so on and so forth. So, yes, everything once understood, we should be talking about the susceptible host, as the case might be. The host is a person or any living animal per se that affords living conditions suitable for the growth of the infectious agents. Susceptibility to infection is universal, but susceptibility to disease depends on immunity, dietary, and nutritional factors thereby. And there might be genetic factors also. Why am I saying this thing? Because, every one of us can be exposed to a similar kind of environment, similar kind of viruses, but only few get severely ill, and some of us do not get affected at all. Now, this is all about your immunity. This is all about your power to fight the diseases. That can be because of your dietary requirements or the nutritional factors or the living style that you adapt. The genetic factors plays an important role. So types of immunity is all about natural or acquired. Natural immunity is the natural resistance that the body offers by the way of skin, mucous membrane, gastric acidity, and respiratory cilia, whereas acquired is passive, acquired through transfer antibodies from the mother to infant, natural or administrative of immunoglobul or antisera artificial. So active post-infection immunity naturally occurs in the following vaccinated artificial things as on when on basis. So let us understand the prerequisite. How important are the prerequisites for the transmissions of the communicable disease? The six prerequisites for transmission of communicable disease are: one, presence of reservoir for infection. Obviously, yes, I have already said plant, I have already said water, I have already said physical being as a presence of reservoir for infection. Presence of microbiological agent, very important. The third is portal of exit through which microbiological agent leaves the reservoir. Let's say when I sneeze, it goes through the sputum, it goes through the throats and comes out in the environment. Portal of exit as a person of a carrier, as an agent, or as a host, it exits my body and probably infect the next best person. Mode of transmission becomes very easy. It might be suspended in the air, probably. It might be skin to skin, face to face. It might be anything that we are talking about it. Portal of inlet is again through which the microbiological things enters the host. It can be again through our nostrils, it can be through our ingestion through our mouth, or it can be through the skin pores, as the case might be, and the presence of the susceptible host. So these are the six things. I again repeat: presence of reservoir for infection, presence of microbiological agent, portal of exit, mode of transmission, portal of entry, and the presence of susceptible host per se. Now is the most important functions of this particular presentation as far as prevention and control is concerned. How do we prevent and control probably all communicable diseases? Yes, we see the pathways, we see the reservoir, the portal of exit, agent, transmission, portal of entry, and susceptible host thereby. So every pathway can be disconnected or can be the chain can be removed. So and once the chain has been removed, the communicable diseases entry or exits have been limited. The movement is limited. So control activities conducted to bring disease or health problem at a very low level till it becomes no longer a public threat altogether. Elimination is termination of all modes of transmission to a reduction of an incidence of a disease to zero in confinement of specific geographic locality as a result of deliberate effort continued with interventions methods as required. Then we have the eradication, termination of all modes of transmission of infection by exterminations of infectious agent as the case might be. This is what we are looking forward to. Next is the eradication is the extermination of all infectious agents. Definitely yes. Now preventions and control measures applied on a break several stage of infection changes. Remember, we have just come out of a pandemic called COVID-19, and wherein the movement of the general public was limited. In fact, people were advised to stay indoors, isolated. Why? Because this transmission mode of entry and mode of exit was to be broken down. That's the easiest way to break the spread altogether, spread of the COVID-19 virus. So measures that directs to the agent is sterilization, disinfections, proper treatment of infected individuals to kill the agent at its source, and that becomes the best way to break the cycle. Let us understand the measure directed at the reservoir. Now, this is the case finding reporting at the local health authority in order to apply appropriate control measures for contact and environment, isolated, strict isolation or discharge, body fluid isolation, and for the whole period of communicability and treatment. Surveillance for the longest incubation period, if the case might be. We are talking about carriers, we are talking about cases. In terms of carriers, identification of carriers in the community, treatment, and probably exclusions from the work till the organism is eliminated, especially if the food handler are working with the children. It is cost effective, depends on the proportion of carriers in the community as well as the sensitivity of the occupation thereby. This is what is a must thing that one needs to follow it out. We should ensure such thing doesn't get repeated. The animal reservoirs, what are we looking into it? Adequate animal husbandry, immunizations of the animals. If vaccine is available, please go ahead and administer them. Treatment of the infected animals and killing if treatment is not feasible is what has been directed. We have been doing about uh, so many animal diseases as is been mentioned with the poultry farm that comes around it. We have the mad cow disease that gets affected. So wherein we are looking, if we cannot administer a vaccine or if there's no vaccination, we would love to exterminate the animals or the group of animals so that there is no chances of the spread of the viruses per se. So measure directly at breaking the transmissions as isolation if indicated, to interrupt the direct transmissions, decontamination of fomites as the vehicle transmissions, hand washing and preventing of fecal-oral transmission, movement from one person to another person, be it from the waste or be it from their negligences, modifying ventilations and air pressures, preventing airborne diseases, and control vector population. Most important, controlling vector-borne diseases as on when-on basis. So transmission and sanitation of water, food, proper sewage and sewage handling thereby is the best methodology wherein we can break the transmission. When I say break the transmission is the mode of entry and the mode of exit thereby. So measure directed towards protecting the portal of entry is using bad nets, wearing mask, gowns to prevent entry of the infected body, secretions of the droplet through skin's mucous membrane, covering skins, and using insect repellent per se. We're talking about measure directed to the host. We're talking about health education, people being aware of, educated, what to do and what to avoid. We are also looking at adequate personal hygiene. Yes, a healthy mind stays in a healthy body, and probably to get a healthy body, we should adopt healthy habits per se, and that is keeping ourselves clean, sound nutrition, immunizations, and chemoprophylaxis as on when on basis. So, what benefits that the complete immunization in the community has it? First, we come with a herd immunity. Immunity. This is very, very important. Complete immunizations coverage can help prevent the agent from reaching the susceptible host. State of immunity within the community. If high proportion of individual in community are resistant to an agent, then the susceptible people will also get protected from the resistant majority as the case might be. This becomes very important for us to understand. So, and probably it can be artificially produced any immunization program, or naturally after the infection, as in we get immunized by the repeated exposures of the viruses, our body brings up the immunity, increases our immunity potentials altogether, and that is what we are looking for it. Remember, the best method is to have a herd immunity overall, so that we can, as a community, sustain and probably combat the disease in a proactive fashion. With this, we come to an end of this presentation. Thank you for watching this video.